So I'll let Jessica introduce herself. She is doing really incredible work. We are so pleased that she agreed very quickly when we asked her. She said, "Of course, I will come and talk." And she wants to talk about a love letter to teachers. So when we're talking about support, we've been looking at the feed on YouTube and people saying that them watching this makes them know that they are supported, makes them know that there's a community of people. This is exactly what Jessica is going to give to you and talk to you about. Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, Dr. Scott. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I am calling in from Minnesota, which is the state where Dred and Harriet Scott were enslaved, but also where they found each other and were married. So I'm coming here this morning to share my love of teachers with you all. I did actually write a letter, y'all, just so you know. So I'm going to be reading this letter just to show everybody how much I love you. So
I'm going to ask you a quick question before I go off screen. You're going to read the letter. Is it possible for you to email me that letter so that I can also make it available to people?
absolutely, I will.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, this is for teachers, and I'm specifically talking to you this morning, teachers. My name is Jessica Ellison, and I am the Executive Director of the National Council for History Education. And our mission is to champion history education and to uplift those who teach it, so that all teachers in all corners of the country know that they belong to a community of practice composed of colleagues who are like the stars. You might not always see them, but you know that they're there. So I'm here this morning to share a message of love. Before you start your school day, sit with me a minute with your coffee or your tea or your Diet Coke and close your eyes and let me remind you of your worth. But first, a story. Mary McLeod Bethune was one of the most important Black educators of the 20th century, the founder of the all-girls boarding school that would eventually become Bethune-Cookman College in Florida. In her last will and testament, she left behind not worldly possessions, but a gift of her wisdom and philosophies on life. Her final call was appropriately about education. She said, "I leave you finally a responsibility to our young people." Bethune ended with a piece of advice that feels like it could have been written yesterday. We have a powerful potential in our youth, and we must have the courage to change old ideas and practices so that we may direct their power toward good ends. Teachers, this is your charge. You rise again and again to meet the needs of each youth in your classroom because you understand their potential as human beings. I see you swimming in oceans of standardized tests, the pressure of performance, a heavy burden for you and your students. I hear you building relationships with each of your students when society tells you to focus on scores instead. I stand beside you always, and especially when you teach truthful, accurate, complex histories that reflect your students' identities, and also a commitment to Bethune's command to change old ideas and practices. I want to acknowledge that the last few years have been really, really hard. Do you remember when you were heroes during the early months of COVID, when we used words like pivot and unprecedented and distance learning to describe the way that you moved mountains in spring 2020? And do you remember how quickly that changed? The words critical race theory trickled into our consciousness and then exploded, calling into question the quality and content of your work. The next 2 years were an avalanche of restrictive legislation, censorship, dramatic school board meetings and elections, and accusations of indoctrination. All the while you were juggling the after effects of a national pandemic. Imagine it too often feels like too much. Take a deep breath. The next part is where I remind you that you are not the sum of the last few years. You are professionals. You love your students. You fight in ways both public and private for your students. And I know that for each one of you, there's a student that you still think about and worry about, even if they sat in your classroom 10 years ago. You've probably come to school early and stayed late more days than you can count. And I am certain that most of you have spent your own money every year of your career to buy students classroom supplies, school lunch, or a winter hat. Anyone who says that you don't care about your kids doesn't know anything about you. But those words still hurt. I find much comfort in the solidarity of historical experiences. When I know that I can relate to someone else's life, I feel empowered in my own. You know this because historical empathy illuminates relevance for your students. When they see themselves in the past, they see their own assets and potential. The same is true for you, teachers. Who are the historical teachers you can admire who also bent over backwards for the students they loved? There's Mary McLeod Bethune, of course, but also Barbara Henry, the only white teacher at France Elementary in New Orleans who was willing to teach Ruby Bridges in 1960. Prudence Crandall opened a school for Black girls in Connecticut in 1833, for which she was arrested and imprisoned. Septima Poinsett Clark taught for 40 years in South Carolina and lost her job when she wouldn't resign from the NAACP. She went on to teach at the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, an education center devoted to social justice. And don't forget that you are someone's favorite teacher. Everyone who has ever been taught has a teacher who lives close to their heart, and you are that person for a student, perhaps many students. We don't always get to see the impact of our work because our children come to us fleetingly and grow up and move on. Someday a student will remember how you made them feel, or recall a book that you read, or understand a life lesson you shared, and their eyes will light up. You are their light. Despite what you know to be true about yourself and your students, the education world feels heavy, and it feels like no one is listening. Every time you turn around, someone with a public platform is denigrating education and those who are on the ground in school buildings. Life feels particularly precarious for history teachers, especially in places where decision makers are limiting or restricting or erasing the teaching of complex historical narratives. You know that the history we all learned in previous generations was not complete, but it feels like you can't do the job without looking over your shoulder. Teachers, take your power. No matter where you teach, you have agency and the ability to change old ideas and practices, like Bethune instructed us to. I know that some of you are afraid, and that is valid. When I feel afraid about speaking up and out, I always think about the great Fannie Lou Hamer, who testified before the 1964 Democratic National Convention on live television about the horrors she faced registering herself and other Southern Black people to vote. She told the story of registering to vote and being threatened with eviction by the white owner of the plantation where she and her family lived. And I addressed him and told him, I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. May we all have the courage of Fannie Lou Hamer. I don't teach history for you. I teach history for my students. So here's where this message of love turns a corner into action, because we need to show our love, not just say it. You know your community best, so please take care of your heart and your safety while you take intentional steps to show up for the history your students deserve. There are big and small, quiet and loud actions you take for your kids and for yourself, and every step matters. Remember that the Montgomery bus boycott was not successful just because of Rosa Parks. It was successful because every single day for an entire year, hundreds of people chose to not get on a bus. This is where you, beloved teachers, don't get on the bus. Lean on the sources. If someone says you're indoctrinating kids about racism, distribute the Mississippi Secession document, which states our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. If someone says you should stick to the facts, Share pamphlets from the Southern Women's League for the rejection of the proposed Susan B. Anthony Amendment and point to the fact that they opposed any measure that threatens the continuation of Anglo-Saxon domination. If someone says that didn't happen here, show them an image of a St. Augustine hotel manager pouring acid in his pool while Black and white integrationists went swimming. Let the sources speak. Teach to the standards. If you can demonstrate how your lessons and resources align with the standards approved by your state Department of Education, you can teach it. If your 8th grade American history standard says, analyze current events relevant to American history topics through a variety of electronic and print media resources, and you're discussing in history instances of violence against Black Americans, such as Denmark VC or the New York slave revolt or conspiracy, it is logical to analyze related current events, including the impact of electronic media on the reactions to the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Let students ask the questions. Let their curiosity lead the way. When you are approaching topics that are full of uncertainty, employ a fishbowl or a structured academic controversy, or even a simple see, think, wonder. If a student is afraid to ask out loud, find quiet or written ways to collect their questions. Try a snowball activity. All students anonymously write their questions on a piece of paper, crumple it up into a small ball, and if you know that this won't descend into chaos, let them toss their snowballs toward the front of the room. Pick one, and at your discretion, read it out loud and let them discuss. This one's for you, teachers. Get yourself a mantra. Years ago, my therapist had me create a mantra to repeat to myself when the world felt too heavy and I felt too insignificant. It addressed my greatest insecurities about myself and affirmed my worth. I am useful. I am competent. Think about your role as a teacher, reflect on your importance as a human, and complete this simple sentence, I am. Put it on a Post-it note on your mirror or on your computer or in your top desk drawer, where you can always see your own words reminding you of your significance. Surround yourself with historical wisdom. I have a desk on my box that my parents gave to me when I was first elected to my school board. It says advice from Eleanor, and it's full of brilliant and compassionate quotes from one of my favorite historical women, Eleanor Roosevelt. Every week I choose a new quote and put it up on my bulletin board to guide my work. I waited to choose this week's quote until I was with you all this morning. So here goes. Oh, with the new day comes new strength and new thoughts. Whose historical wisdom lifts you up? Engage publicly. This is hard. I feel your fear. I hold your exhaustion in my heart. But you occupy a powerful space in American society. You are the thread that connects students with the world outside of their small circle. They are watching you. You can model the ways to show up in your community, and they will see that you are doing it for them. Attend school board meetings and maybe speak at one. Put your words on the public record, not in an angry social media space, but as a testifier at the state legislature. And this one always feels like I'm asking you to lasso the moon. Run for elected office. Is there another profession that has a greater understanding of the human experience? You see 30 children at a time, all with different experiences and needs, and are expected to provide them with engaging, rigorous lessons within 48 minutes. Your powers of management, compassion, and delegation are unparalleled. Who better to take on the mantle of governance than those who can juggle with one hand tied behind their back? You can do it, friends. This can be your next year's to-do list. The school year is almost over, and I wish you a summer of naps, cold drinks on the patio, novels, moments of stillness, and long walks in the sun. When you begin to prepare for the next school year, remember, you are not alone. Your allies are everywhere, and my hope for you is that the quiet ones start to speak up, the active ones call others in, and the ones that have always existed outside your line of sight come into view. We all can be your sanctuary. I will leave you today with another beautiful line from Mary McLeod Bethune's Last Will and Testament that absolutely rings true for your education heart work. The knowledge that my work has been helpful to many fills me with joy and great satisfaction. Teachers, we will continue to fortify your great service to your communities, and you just keep doing what you do best. We love you. Sincerely, everybody who loves you, which is a lot of everybody's.